Welcome back to the channel. This episode is on the 666th chapter of Space Marines, the Grey Knights, the Demon Hunters. Now, before we talk about the Knights directly, I want to set up just how different this chapter is from practically every other chapter of Space Marines in the entire setting and galaxy. While it is true that the Imperium is one of the bloodiest and most oppressive regimes imaginable, the Imperium is also unfathomably large. The planets and empires under its aegis, it claims, are many and varied. Your average Imperial citizen lives a rather mundane life. They go to work, they have families, they go home. Of course, the most extreme places and positions in the Imperium we get more exposed to for excitement and narrative reasons in the novels and setting. Places like hive cities, where everyone is basically ammo in a machine or resources, like to be used for grotesqueries and things like that. Becoming a slave to the Mechanicus and turned into a servitor, or whatever other nightmarish existence you can think of. Regardless of what you or anyone as average citizen in the Imperium's position is, they all have one thing in common. And that is 99.9% of all citizens have never seen a Space Marine of any kind, of any chapter, ever at all. And most of them have never heard of chaos either. You are more likely to see a Space Marine the higher in society you are, but mostly in specific fields of study at that point still, such as being a general in the armies of the Imperium, a Navy commander in the Imperial fleets, or becoming something like an Inquisitor. But even as an average soldier, you are likely to never see a Space Marine of any kind. You hear legends of their prowess in battle, their invincibility, while they are angels of the Emperor's wrath incarnate. And if you are a soldier, you never want to see a Space Marine. And may the Emperor protect you if you came across a Chaos Marine who you were never told existed in the first place, raving about dark gods you have never heard of as they murder your friends, and you probably. You don't want to see a Space Marine, because that means you are in a conflict that requires Space Marines to be present. Space Marines are rare, and only tend to arrive at conflicts that are already terrible and needing that extra support to push through or otherwise fail. Or enemies like the forces of chaos are present, so on and so forth. Point being, things are bad if any amount of Marines are needed to be present. And then we get the Grey Knights. They fight what is known as the Secret War, for they are not even known to most Space Marines, let alone to your average soldier or average citizen. They are that rare, and the Grey Knights are arguably the most powerful chapter currently operating. Each is a powerful psyker, wielding unique and powerful weaponry. If this chapter arrives on your world or your conflict zone, things aren't just bad, things are a living nightmare. Hell has arrived. Things are at an apocalypse level, with demons flowing through the streets like rivers, greater demons glutting themselves on your fellow soldiers and laughing at your lasgun as you fire at it in a panic, not knowing what you're even fighting, or why or how it even exists. So, not only would you not know who the Grey Knights are, you'd also not probably live to even talk about what you are witnessing due to the absolute insane situations the Grey Knights are often deploying themselves into. Wow, I said that a little bit weird. I said like grenades instead of Grey Knights. It's the Grey Knights. I apologize. So anyway, just wanted to impress upon how rare and unique these Marines are. They are not your normal Space Marine or chapter. The Grey Knights have their origins in the Horus Heresy era, when half of the Space Marine legions fell. The right hand of the Emperor, Malcador the Sigillite, was tasked by the Emperor to create this chapter as a final tool against chaos for what they had wrought against his forces. He realized that not even his custodes or Silent Sisterhood were wards enough against the forces of the thirsting warp gods. They took too long to create. They also didn't have psyker abilities, and the Thousand Suns Legion, which was the one specialized in such use, had fallen to the Chaos God Zench and were proven to be failures. So during the heresy, Malcador searched out Marines that were from traitors and loyalists alike. He was seeking a few traits: stalwart loyalty to the Emperor and latent psychic ability at the same time. Malcador eventually amassed a force of Marines called his Knights Errant, who acted as his agents throughout the galaxy during much of the later heresy. Free of iconography or identifiers and clad in gray, they were often sent on clandestine missions by Malkador to help seek out these 8 special potential founders for the Grey Knights. Eventually, 8 specific Marines were identified, and they were met by the Emperor himself one final time before the Siege of Terra officially began. Chief amongst these recruits was Ruvul Arvida, who is notably from the Thousand Sons Legion, one of the sons who was not with Magnus, Ahriman, and the rest of the Legion when they were transported to the planet of sorcerers by Zench. Arvida almost fell due to the inherent instability of his gene seed. The flesh change. At this time, Magnus the Red's personality was shattered into many shards of himself, and one of these, the one most loyal to the Emperor, actually found its way to Terra at this time. It was drawn to Arvida, and it merged with him. What emerged from this union was a Marine that went by the name Ianius or Janus. This Marine also had a closed eye like Magnus was often depicted, and seemed to have the deep wisdom and knowledge of that Primarch, but without the arrogance or conceit that brought that Primarch to fall to the forces of chaos. Janus became the first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights eventually. The rest I will name that made up these 8. Tylus Rubio from the Ultramarines Legion, renamed as Kolos. Severian, the Wolf of the Luna Wolves Legion, renamed Iapto, I believe it's how it's pronounced. Bardus Isan from the Blood Angels Legion, renamed Satyr or Satre, I think. The rest, their original names are not given, but they are Epimetheus, Dark Angels Legion, and I apologize for that. That was quite the name. Jotun from the Space Wolves Legion. Ogen of the Raven Guard Legion. And Chiron, whose name and legion are both unknown. Although I think some people speculate that could end up being Sevatar, but at this point in the Horus Heresy books that I read with these being involved, Sevatar was not free, but I know there has been speculation that Sevatar is recruited to be part of the Grey Knights, but this is not known. The last, but certainly not least, on this list was Garvio Loken, also of the Luna Wolves, who was to take the name Crius. Notably, though, Loken refused this position to a as of yet unknown fate in the Siege of Terra or beyond. These 8 were sent to the moon of Saturn, Titan, and there Malkador sent the entire planet sealed away into the warp to hide it from the coming traitor legions. Titan had secretly had an entire fortress built and stocked with a new form of gene seed, not from any of the legions, and is thought to be derived directly from the Emperor himself, and over 100,000 potential recruits to create a chapter out of. There is an interesting quote given by the Emperor regarding this chapter's formation. Quote, "One unbreakable shield against the coming darkness. One last blade forged in defiance of fate. Let them be my legacy to the galaxy I conquered, and my final gift to the species I failed." End quote. I find it interesting that if this is true, the Emperor talks about having failed the species, and this being almost a final ploy on his way out from directly influencing his species. Long after the heresy ended, the moon of Saturn returned, and time had moved faster for the Grey Knights than had in real space, and the Inquisition was ready to receive this boon they were told of was going to be arriving. They found on the world Janus and the 1,000 Grey Knights ready to serve the Imperium against their most dreaded foes. While most chapters operate outside of normal Imperial hierarchy, as their own islands usually, recognizing only Emperor directly, the Grey Knights are intrinsically part of the Inquisition itself, specifically the Ordo Malleus branch, which deals exclusively in demon hunting. And it's also important to note that Grey Knights kind of have imbued within them a greater authority than even most chapters do, since they have the dual authority of a Space Marine, loyal to the Emperor and his authority, but also they have credentials from the Inquisition, which lets them get into a lot more places because the Inquisition has more power and authority than Space Marines, despite Space Marines not really taking orders from the Inquisition. It's safe to say the Inquisition is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful institution in the current Imperium. I'll have to do more of an overview on them to talk about them as well. But they are highly related to the Grey Knights in this way. And from then on to the 40k era, the Grey Knights have been the best force multiplier against chaos the Imperium has active. They seem to share the exact same immunity to chaos as the Emperor, and also are psychers, like the Emperor. This is the main difference between Grey Knights and Custodes, other than them being Space Marines as well. The Grey Knights stare into the abyss, and when the abyss stares back, it is the one that recoils in fear from what it sees. For the Grey Knights are also anathema to the stuff of chaos, just as the Emperor was, despite also being able to use the raw stuff of the warp themselves. Normally, most psychers are playing with a very real risk when utilizing their powers. They can be possessed by a demon. They can be consumed utterly by the warp. Many bad fates await psychers who misuse their powers or don't have a good handle on them. Not so the Emperor, and not so the Grey Knights, making both a unique terror to the warp denizens that like to gleefully glut themselves upon mortal souls. These forces are their true nightmare, as they are able to not only strike down demons, but even destroy them utterly sometimes, both in the warp and in the mortal realm, bringing real risk to demonkind. For the more powerful demon princes and greater demons though, often banishment is the only option, and Grey Knights will often seek out the true name of a powerful demon to use against it in combat. For if you know a demon's true name, you can control it, make a pact with it, or hoard it greatly, making it easier to banish back to the warp. If a demon, prince, or greater demon, or fallen Primarch is spotted, the Grey Knights will not often be far behind in pursuing them. I haven't ever seen how it works exactly, but when a Grey Knight banish a demon prince or greater demon, they are able to keep written down when that entity will make its way back into real space, whether it's 20 years, a century, or more. And they will then seek out where they expect that demon to manifest to send it back to that cauldron of chaos it boils out from yet again. One notable example of this is in the book suitably named Grey Knights. It's now an older book, but it's one of the earliest ones I read, and it brings home the nightmare situations these knights are sent into, even in comparison to other chapters and forces of the Imperium. They spent over 100 nights to defeat a demon prince of Tzeentch, Gargatuloth, Prince of 1,000 Faces. They dropped onto a world completely corrupted and inundated with demonic forces. It basically described the planet's floor, the ground of the world, just seeping blood out and demons crawling everywhere. And these 100 Grey Knights made landfall, and they were being picked off, but cutting a bloody path through the demons. And eventually, a Grandmaster of the chapter named Mandolus was able to confront Gargatuloth, who took the form of a gigantic flesh pillar and was able to banish the prince back to the warp, but at the cost of the entire Grey Knights task force sent. They knew that Gargatuloth would arrive around 100 more years into the future, which is where the book really starts, and the small force of Grey Knights sent to find where he would manifest again is a very interesting, more of a detective story than straight up fighting. The Grey Knights have to find knowledge as much as fight anything with their weapons. And since we are dealing with the Weaver of Plots and a champion of Tzeentch, they have to do quite a bit of trying to, find the symbology that is, bringing back this demon prince. I highly recommend reading the book if you'd like to learn the outcome of how they find the demon prince again and how that all goes down. Grey Knight's armor is also unique looking and unique in function. It is inscribed with numerous wards against chaos, and the very flesh of a Grey Knight is tattooed with anagrams against chaos as well. Basically anything that purifies them against chaos, the Grey Knights wield, functionally making them immune to its pernicious infection. No Grey Knight has fallen to chaos. Now for a bit here, I want to speculate on the Grey Knight's nature. This is just my thoughts after a decade plus of reading this stuff. But this chapter is a mystery in some ways, and I want to bring some of that up, some of my own thoughts and questions on them. First off, it is not known for sure that the Emperor was the derivation of their gene seed. As mentioned, the founders of the chapter all came from several loyalist and traitor legions. Unless it's specifically said in a codex I haven't read, someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I have not heard that it's for sure that they have gene seed from the Emperor. It's notable to be bring up that the founders of the chapter all came from several loyalist and traitor legions. Why those specific legions is not explained by Malcador or anyone else. And it is interesting to note this, because why choose anyone from existing chapters that were proven to have fallibility? There's been followers of chaos from any of these legions, including the loyalist ones that stayed loyal during the heresy. After the heresy, members of each of these forces have fallen to chaos at some point or another. If the source of their incorruptibility is this new gene seed, I find it interesting they didn't simply create a few Marines with some of it to start the chapter, instead of pick these 8 from, gene seed that is proven to be not as stable. It is also notable to point out that these 8 original Grandmasters, what happened upon their eventual demise fighting chaos. Where did that gene seed go? Is it still in some of the Grey Knights? If they're using a specific gene seed type, what was the point of having these original founders? Did they just send the gene seed back to their chapters? It's just a thought I have. And then you have someone like Janus, who not only had the original, arguably most unstable gene seed in the Thousand Suns origin, but you also had a shard of a Primarch soul melded into him. What happened to Janus? Do one of the current Grandmasters bear his very unique, one-of-a-kind gene seed upon his death? Did he die? It's not known. And the exact origin of the gene seed used for the Grey Knights is not known for sure either. Also of note here is the Grey Knights use some weaponry similar in style and function to the Custodes, and they also share in the same exact immunity to chaos as the Custodes. Although the Custodes seemingly do not have the same types of purity seals and other more faith-styled immunity the Grey Knights wield, nor are any of the Custodes ever seen to be Psykers either. I just find this an interesting difference, when both forces are seen as better than normal Space Marines. Both are secretive organizations, and both are great at fighting demons. Although the Custodes seem to be harder to make and can't make use of Psyker ability, despite being servants of the most powerful Psyker in known existence. If the Grey Knights are hard to make, but easier to make than Custodes, why limit the Grey Knights to 1,000? If they are totally immune to chaos, truly immune to them, then the danger of the legions from before is immaterial to them, and you'd want more than 1,000 of these to defeat your numberless enemy. It surely seems that the Grey Knights are in some ways a replacement for the role the Custodes have had to fill, in some regards, near the end of the heresy. As while the Custodes are great warriors, they were never meant to only be warriors, whereas the Grey Knights certainly are. Also of note, every Custode is a unique, bespoke creation, and there seemingly isn't any gene seed used in their crafting, to my knowledge. To kind of leave off on this speculation, I want to read a quote from a book called The Watchers of the Throne, Emperor's Legion, which has a musing from a Custode on the Knights, and how they feel about them, and some of the speculation I have here is also shared with the Custodes, who interestingly also don't seem to know all the reasons why the Knights were made, instead of, say, modifying the Custodes or something like that. Quote, "They came, the Grey Knights, whom we had always had uneasy relations with, answered our summons. I do not know if it was my request that prompted the order, or if Valoris had been petitioned by others. In any case, we were not so proud that we could not ask for help when it was needed. There is a profound distinction to be made here. We could both, Custodian and Grey Knight, slay demons. We were both, to all intents and purposes, immune to their temptations, and we are both effective against their many stratagems. There are 2 great repositories of lore against the demonic in the Sol system. Our own archives in the Tower of Hegemon, and the far greater librarium lodged on Titan itself. We are, as orders, steeped to our very cores in fight against the great enemy. Perhaps, you might say, chaos is the reason for both of our existences. And yet, we are different. Remember I told you that we were never warriors, not exclusively. We are certainly not an army, and we were intended, in the original scheme, for service in an empire that never came to be. Our cousins in the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus, by contrast, were forged exclusively for the singular war against our most powerful and enduring foe. They have no other purpose, just like the Space Marines, from whose template they were drawn. They are an army, complete and self-sufficient. We always knew of their existence, there are records held privately in the depths of our archives which chronicle their creation. We watched 10,000 years ago as he embarked on his last gambit, as the great enemy drew close to Terra. We observed the darkening of Saturn's moon and knew that one day it would return, its purpose fulfilled. Consider what this history means. We know that they came after us, the more junior creation, and yet they were as closely associated with him as we were. We both of us look to him and him alone as our progenitor, and share the same sense, cultivated over the wearing eons, that we enact his designs when all others falter. There are some amongst my brothers who do not see the sons of Titan as much more than specialized space marines, to be regarded with suspicion as part of that schismatic breed that caused us so much anguish in the past. A space marine may always fail, they believe, given enough time and enough reason, and thus they are all part of the same potentially aberrant strain. Some think that. Others, and myself have often speculated in such a vein, cultivate a different misgiving. We know well enough that they were designed as his last great weapon, fitted to an age that he foresaw near the end of his earthly embodiment. What if it were they, not us, who most faithfully embodied his final legacy? You will never hear one of us say as much out loud, but that does not mean the suspicion does not exist. It skulks around the corridors of a hegemon like a foul odor, faint, but hard to eradicate. From the speculum certus, we know we were the finest and most faithful. In the speculum obscurus, there is, as always, more doubt. Such, then, is the cause of the uneasiness between us. In practice, this rarely proved an issue, since they were not generally on Terra, and we were never on Titan. Now, of course, that had changed. They sent fewer warriors than we asked for, less than half of one of their brotherhoods. Many of the Grey Knights were stationed far from the Sol system, it is true, but still the response felt somewhat paltry. They must have known what it would have cost our Captain General to make the request, and it was hard to think that the slight was not an intentional one. End quote. So, the Custodes seemingly wonder about the Grey Knights and their nature compared to themselves, and they kind of have a off and on relationship of, they have a healthy respect for them and what their potential is, but they feel a little bit maybe replaced by the Grey Knights on some level, and it's kind of interesting to know that. One of the best depictions of a Grey Knight specifically is in an Ultramarine novel called The Killing Ground. In it, Uriel Ventress, a captain of the Ultramarines, and his sergeant have arrived on a world after surviving being in the warp on the Iron Warriors world of Medrengard in the Eye of Terror for some time. A Grey Knight captain named Leo Degarius is notified of their arrival point and arrived on the world and took them into his custody. He advised Uriel, "I am Leo Degarius, and you are my prisoner." Now, I don't remember if Uriel really had truly heard of the Knights before this interaction, but later on, Uriel was describing the features of Leo Degarius. He basically was staring Leo Degarius in the eye, as Leo Degarius was examining his mind and soul by, looking at him. And in him he saw a purity unmatched in soul by any other being he had ever met. He considered this Grey Knight a true hero in every sense of the word, which I just remember from a very long time ago reading that book. Despite the stoicism on display there, the Grey Knight also showed some humor. Leo Degarius had put Uriel through purity tests to ensure that chaos hadn't infected him, and the final test was for Uriel and his sergeant to fight Leo Degarius in a combat and defeat him 2 versus 1. Uriel asks Leo Degarius what the rules of the fight are, and the knight simply replies with, "You are such a Ultramarine," and with a grin punches Uriel in the face, starting the fight. So I just found that kind of funny that even Leo Degarius kind of dunked on the Ultramarines for, being Ultramarines. Leo Degarius defeats both of them fairly easily, and they both expected to be executed by the Grey Knight for failing. Instead, Leo Degarius declares them clean and advised them that the only true dangerous chaos entities could have truly bested him in combat, and had they somehow defeated him, they would have been executed at that point, proving that they were corrupted. I have another speculation here is in regard to the true secrecy of this chapter. As I said at the beginning of this video, the size of the Imperium means that 1,000 soldiers of any combat ability are not going to be known nearly anywhere at the same time at all. But in the wikis and other sources researching this, there seems to be an insistence that anyone seeing a Grey Knight's force or like witnesses chaos are mind wiped or executed. Certainly this canon does happen. Some Inquisitors especially are ruthless in this way, but even amongst their number, many would call that sort of policy fanaticism to an unacceptable degree. Now, one of the only times I can recall this really happening was during a conflict on Armageddon, when the Grey Knights banished Ankon back to the warp. The Inquisition wanted to execute all civilians and soldiers that had witnessed the conflict and the Grey Knights. The Space Wolves intervened in a brief battle against the Grey Knights and Inquisition and stopped that from happening. But I want to point out there's plenty of other material where forces of the Imperium witness chaos or fight it or even help the Grey Knights, and there is no note of wiping their minds or executing them. And this seems to be the case. It seems to be a case-by-case type of thing. And I suppose the degree of chaos you are exposed to is largely how likely it would be that you'd be executed or witnessing it. The Imperium does want to keep its secrets, and one of which is chaos even existing, or the Grey Knights. But despite their reputation for being to toss soldiers into a meat grinder, plenty of regiments are simply too valuable to simply waste in that way. An example I have is the Tanith First and Only Imperial Guard Regiment, who has fought forces of chaos several times and has not had their minds wiped, or the forces threatened with execution. Several of them have even went behind enemy lines and infiltrated a chaos-occupied world, so anyway. So like all things in the lore, I think this is a bit of a truth taken to the extreme to say this always happens, when I have seen it definitely not be the case, both with interactions with the knights themselves and also when fighting chaos. I can imagine they are at least told not to talk about it, like in a classified type of way, or the obvious would happen to them though. And so that is a bit of speculation and overview on this chapter of Space Marines. In my mind, the Grey Knights are almost like the updated replacement for the Thousand Suns Legion and what they were hoped to be, without the instability of Gene Seed or arrogance of their Primarch. Interestingly, a part of Magnus led or continues to lead this chapter, and the Grey Knights being limited to 1,000 in number is also telling to me. I do like how there is some invested mystery in this group, and their origins are partially known. There is still speculation on the details. There's quite a lot more to talk about with this chapter, and I may do a more exhaustive deep dive in the future on them and their tactics. I highly recommend reading the wikis and novels involving them, as they are sent into some of the most hellish situations imaginable, even by Space Marine standards. And their tech and weaponry is more unique and more interesting than the normal chapters have access to. An example of this is they have at their disposal several of the Tesseract cubes that the Necrons made to trap Catan shards in. They use them to trap especially dangerous demons in, and notably they've even trapped one greater demon in one. Not even demons can find their way out of these cubes that contain pocket dimensions. Now we'll leave this one here. As always, please like and subscribe for more content when it comes out. Please leave a comment to correct or request anything new, or to discuss the topic at hand. I'm not really sure what I will do next. I think maybe perhaps I'll go back to the alien species and talk about the orcs next. They're a pretty prominent species. I haven't read a lot on them personally, but I do like the orcs a lot, but they're might be a little bit tougher for me to do an overview on in some ways, but they're an important faction to talk about, I feel like. As always, take your light into the dark places, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for spending some time here, and have a great day or night wherever you are. Talk to you soon.